Now, I'm not one to say any piece of media is perfect, because I don't believe anything is truly perfect. I think everything can be improved to some extent. But How to Train Your Dragon 1 is a perfect movie. Now, you might be thinking, but that just contradicts what you just said, and you would be right, but what I mostly mean when I say this movie is perfect is in the sense of the writing. Because while I think it still looks damn good visually, I'd be lying to say that the animation isn't at least like a little bit dated. And even looking at like How to Train Your Dragon 3, for example, I wouldn't, include that in perfect animation, because, personally, there's only like 4 animated films that I've ever watched in my life that have actually achieved like visual perfection. Anyways, when I watched this movie as but a wee lad who still peed the bed, I immediately loved it. I didn't know why I loved it because, my brain wasn't capable of critical thought, but having rewatched this movie 6 times since the first time I watched it as a kid, this movie still holds up beautifully on each rewatch. Before starting, remember you guys can always come on a disagreement day if you have any criticisms of this movie, the second movie, or the third movie, and make sure you join my Discord to stay updated on when we do them, as well as, updated on other things. So without further ado, let's break down the greatness of the start of the best animated trilogy of all time. Right from the opening scene of this movie, we are quickly introduced to the world with what we need to know about the world and the history within it, as well as our prominent characters, and it does all of this in the middle of a great action sequence. This is just one part of what makes this movie so great, and one of the reasons why it is still my favorite in the entire trilogy. The pacing for this movie is excellent, and it doesn't waste time with any unnecessary things that don't need to be included. Even humorous moments in this movie have something to say about the characters or world. And speaking of the characters, that's what this opening scene primarily focuses on. Starting with Hiccup, you can immediately tell what his internal conflict is. He wants to have status within his village. He has the relatable feeling of wanting what he believes is like the prettiest girl in his village. He starts off this movie thinking that if he just starts killing dragons like everyone else in the village to try and fit into the societal norms around him, and he also wants to be respected and looked upon like his father is one day. But Hiccup has a major problem. He's not strong and he doesn't know how to fight well. So to compensate for this, he tries to use his engineering skills to give himself what he needs to kill a dragon. So when seeing a Night Fury starting to attack the village during this big battle, he tries to go out and prove himself with this catapult. And it works. He takes down the Night Fury, but after this, a dragon comes in to try and attack him. Stoic sees this, and with a disappointed sigh, he goes to protect Hiccup. And Hiccup's mess causes even more damage within the village. And as he tries to tell his dad about the Night Fury he took out, his father doesn't believe him, as Hiccup has a past of saying he does things, but they aren't actually true in the past. Which I interpret again as another instance of Hiccup just trying to fit in the past. But his father doesn't demean him out of spite. It's rather because he wants him to be better. Stoic has his own set of problems to worry about when it comes to maintaining the village's chief, and Hiccup continuously not following orders, making his job as a father also more stressful. And as Gobber tries to convince Stoic to put Hiccup in dragon training, due to the fact that Gobber knows Hiccup is stubborn and will continue to try and prove himself, we see how Stoic differs so much from Hiccup, even when they were kids, and how Stoic doesn't know how to properly raise or deal with Hiccup. He wants to keep Hiccup safe the best way he knows how, but in this moment he comes to accept that what Gobber is saying has truth to it. He can't protect his own stubborn kid, who constantly tries to fight back against the dragons, if he just constantly puts him in coddled and sheltered. But moving on, still determined to prove himself, Hiccup goes to find the Night Fury he took down, and as he approaches Toothless, he's proud of himself and excited what he's done. But in trying to build up the confidence to kill Toothless, Hiccup sees that Toothless is just a defenseless and scared creature right now, about to accept its fate. And Hiccup realizes the reality of what he's done and just can't bring himself to kill Toothless. So he cuts Toothless out of the ropes and Toothless attacks. He stares down Hiccup and gives him mercy. And so Hiccup goes back home, where his father tells him that he'll be going into dragon training the next morning. But at this point, Hiccup doesn't want to kill dragons because of the experience that he just went through. And he tries to communicate this to his father, but Stoic is not listening to what Hiccup has to say, as he thinks he knows better. But during dragon training, we see more of how Hiccup is treated and seen throughout the village. And when he's almost killed by a dragon, Gobber tells him, remember, dragons always go for the kill. Which makes Hiccup wander back to Toothless, wondering why he wasn't killed earlier, which leads him to figuring out that Toothless can't fly away from the place where he's trapped because Hiccup injured his tail flap. And when dropping his pencil, Hiccup sees Toothless give him a look which turns from more of a defensive kind of look to one that's more just genuine interest in Hiccup, as he sees Hiccup as non-threatening right now. And so Hiccup goes to the mess hall, where he's rudely greeted by the other Berkean kids. And one thing I would like to mention is how, when going through this movie, I like how in every scene where Astrid and Hiccup are together, you can always subtly tell that Astrid has an interest in Hiccup, and even when she's an asshole to him at points in the movie, it mostly comes across as disappointment rather than spite, just like his dad kind of. And I think this is neat, but within her character throughout the movie, we see how seriously seriously she takes the dragon fighting. When anyone else is goofing off, she doesn't berate them as much as Hiccup, and I like how this kind of subtly shows that she does have an interest in Hiccup and wants him to be better. But as Hiccup reads through the dragon manual, all he sees throughout is
turns its victims, buries its victims, chokes its victims, turns its victims inside out. Extremely dangerous, kill on sight, kill on sight, kill on sight.
Which is representative of how the Burkians have seen the dragons for centuries. And in the very next scene, what we see is that war continuing as Stoic and the Vikings go into unknown territory to try and flush out the dragons. And then moving on to the next day at dragon training, Hiccup is trying to pry on Gobber for, information on Night Furies because the manual had nothing on them. But Gobber can't really tell him because he as well doesn't know anything about Night Furies. So Hiccup as well has to take a leap of faith into unknown territory in attempts to understand Toothless. He brings him a fish as sort of a peace offering to Toothless, and Toothless spits part of it back out for Hiccup to eat, which I kind of view as Toothless as well starting to test the waters with Hiccup and testing a bit of trust between them. And I love how as they kind of like try to understand each other, Toothless is like kind of mimicking Hiccup's behavior, and they're both kind of like feeding off each other's energy as they're like, both in unknown territory right now. And this is just so adorable as they test like each other's trust. And Hiccup attempts to reach out his hand to touch Toothless, but Toothless doesn't fully trust Hiccup enough to do so. And eventually, Toothless takes an interest in Hiccup drawing, and he wants to try it for himself. And he draws around Hiccup, again, as something of a test of trust. And when Hiccup thinks that he understands what Toothless wants, he reaches out his hand once more, but Toothless doesn't trust Hiccup enough still. So Hiccup instead lets his hand out and allows Toothless to come to him instead. And this is the start of their connection with each other. Then when eating with the Dragon Training Group later that night, I like the subtle detail of how Hiccup is the only one eating a fish while the others are eating chicken. It's a subtle detail that shows how Hiccup is the only one getting closer to the dragons, and as well the group is talking about killing dragons. And when eating, Gobber says to Fish Legs that the wings and the tail are the most important things to go for when fighting dragons, because without them, dragons can't fly. And this is just another moment again that shows the difference between the two mindsets. Hiccup being the one that will fix Toothless's tail, and ride with him shows the start of the connection of what can be when the dragons and humans come together, as opposed to the mindset of them fighting one another. And Hiccup's invention works. And on the next day of dragon training, he is the only one who succeeds thanks to his experience with Toothless and understanding the behavior of the dragons, as opposed to everyone else trying to win through, brutaler methods. And Hiccup gets to work and keeps practicing flying with Toothless until they finally get flying right. And during this, Hiccup continues to understand more and more about the dragon's behavior, which causes him to excel at training in the middle of this, montage as he continues training with Toothless and, practicing with the other dragons as well. And Astrid gets frustrated by this because her whole life, all she's known is the fight training and the brutal nature of handling dragons. And when Hiccup, a person who's never been good at any of those things, starts to excel at handling dragons, she's dumbfounded by it and wants to understand it. And when coming back to Berk after a failure to find the nest and a hard fight, Stoic is brought the surprise that Hiccup is actually doing good in dragon training, but not in the way that he thinks. This leads us to my favorite scene within this entire movie, what the training and relationship building with Toothless has been leading up to. Their first real flight with each other. As they start flying, having little missteps, which is reminiscent of the start of their relationship, and things start to go good, and then Hiccup and Toothless start falling, and instead of using his cheat sheet, he has to take another leap of faith to fly Toothless without it. This scene is just pure perfection, and I love how it symbolizes the whole growth of their relationship in one compact scene, and it has one of my favorite OST songs in anything ever. And this all ends with more dragons coming to Toothless and Hiccup as they're out, somewhere else.
Everything we know about you guys is wrong.
When going back to Berk, his dad comes into his room, first making Hiccup think that he found out about Toothless. But then it transitions into Stoic praising him for something that he doesn't want to be praised for. His dad thinks they finally have something to talk about, that Hiccup finally has changed for the better, and he's now a great dragon fighter, but Hiccup has no words to say because he knows his dad just probably won't listen as usual. And I like how awkward this conversation plays out because of those things. And the next day, Hiccup once again wins during dragon training, but what he gets as a reward is the honor of killing the most dangerous dragon they have, which is not much of a reward at all to him. And as he goes to Toothless again because he wants to leave and he doesn't want to kill that dragon, he slips up and allows himself to be followed by Astrid as she wants to get to the bottom of how Hiccup is doing whatever he's doing. And after a little fight, and her running away, she gives Hiccup the chance to show her the good side of dragons. Toothless takes them on a ride, initially giving a hard time to Astrid because she came off as aggressive at first, but when she apologizes and stops being so hostile, Toothless as well calms down, and then her whole worldview is just flipped upside down, seeing the beauty of what dragons can be, or more of what they truly are. And as they continue flying, they are brought to the dragon's nest from the Alpha's call. And Hiccup has to think of a plan to go about taking on the Alpha Dragon. And I like how Astrid first punches Hiccup and then kisses him, with her body language kind of being awkward about it, as it's just another showing of how Astrid kind of like hides her true feelings behind anger towards other people. She's pretty closed off with like emotionally, but she has a soft spot, obviously. But as Stoic hosts a big speech before Hiccup goes into the final test of dragon training, getting all the love, praise, and pride from his father, I just love the mirror of how this is all he wanted in the beginning of the movie, but now that he's gotten it, it's all for the wrong reason, and he now has to try and shift every single person in Burke's worldview that they've held for centuries. And when attempting to do so, Stoic interferes, which causes the dragon to get defensive, and Toothless jumps in to protect Hiccup, almost killing Stoic if it wasn't for Hiccup telling him to stop. Stoic takes Hiccup to berate him about what just transpired, and he still won't listen to Hiccup. He can't understand Hiccup's perspective because he's too stubborn in his ways to even try and listen right now. Hiccup tries to calm his dad down. He tries to continue to tell him the information that he's just learned in an effort to try and make him go easy on not just Toothless but the other dragons, of how they only attack because they defend themselves and how they only raid the village to bring back food for the Alpha. But in the effort of trying to talk his dad down and trying to make him understand, Hiccup accidentally lets out too much information, and right when he does, he realizes he made a huge mistake. Stoic has fully given up on Hiccup at this point, choosing dragons, the species that they've been at war with for centuries, over his own people, over his family's legacy, and Stoic denounces him of even being his son.
You've thrown your lot in with them. You're not a Viking. You're not my son.
But you can still tell that those words were hard for him to say, as he still has sympathy because Hiccup still is his son. And as Stoic prepares the ships to invade the dragon's nest, foolishly and stubbornly not listening to Hiccup, he straps down Toothless to force him to lead them there. And Hiccup watches helplessly as everything he's built up and worked at for weeks has all come crumbling down. Astrid goes to talk to Hiccup in an effort to uplift him in her, Astrid way of doing so. And she pries Hiccup on why he wouldn't kill Toothless in the beginning.
I wouldn't kill him because he looked as frightened as I was. I looked at him, and I saw myself.
He feels ashamed and conflicted once again on the way he feels, and Astrid reminds him of what he believes isn't a bad thing. And as Stoic prepares to storm the dragon's nest, Hiccup and the others join forces with the dragons to stop the siege. And some may raise the question of how the Burkians are able to fly the dragons correctly so quickly, but to that, Hiccup only has really trouble flying Toothless due to the obvious fact that his tail is broken. The dragons are also not really equivalent to something like dogs in the real world. They are very intelligent in their own respect, maybe not as intelligent as the humans, but they are still definitely more intelligent than any animal in the real world. It's also shown that Hiccup is showing them their way around the dragons before they leave, and they would have had time to start getting used to riding on the dragons' backs on the way to the nest, so I just wanted to clarify that. But anyways, as Stoic and the Vikings invade the nest, the Alpha Dragon comes out and starts to wreak havoc on the Vikings, and this finally makes Stoic realize that he made a huge mistake in not listening to Hiccup. He realizes that he just led all these Vikings to a fight which they can't win, and as Gobber and Stoic are about to sacrifice themselves to save everyone more time to try and get away, Hiccup and the group come in to save them. And Gobber says, "Ever bit the stubborn Viking you ever..." Yeah, I can't do that voice.
Every bit the boar-headed, stubborn Viking you ever were.
Which makes Stoic realize that him and Hiccup are more alike than he ever realized before. And as Hiccup starts to drown trying to save Toothless, Stoic finally turns over a new leaf. He saves Toothless, and Toothless brings them both back up to shore. And Stoic tells Hiccup that he doesn't have to go out there and fight, but Hiccup knows he does. And they both take a sentiment from each other, as Hiccup knows that him and Toothless are going to have to kill the Alpha Dragon to stop the fighting for good at this point, calling back to a line in the beginning of the movie where Stoic was telling all the Vikings, "We're Vikings, it's an occupational hazard," when they were about to go into, the dragon's nest in the beginning. And Stoic replies back with,
I'm proud to call you my son.
Then we get this dope-ass final battle with this fire-ass OST, and I like how the way they beat the dragon is something that calls back to an earlier scene in the movie where Hiccup sees that they aren't fireproof on the inside. But winning this battle comes with a cost. Hiccup has to get his leg amputated, and I like how when he tries to walk with a broken part of his body, Toothless is there to help him, the same way that Hiccup was there to help Toothless when, his tail was broken. And Burke is now accepting of the dragons living amongst them. And I love the line from Stoic where he says, "Turns out all we needed was a little more of this."
You just gestured to all of me.
Calling back to the beginning of the movie, but now, instead of a negative one, it's a good sentiment. I absolutely love this movie. It will always be one of my favorite movies of all time, and it will always be my favorite movie in the trilogy, not just because I think it's got the best pacing, and also I think the writing is just equal to the third movie, but it's also just a very nostalgic connection for me. The writing, pacing, acting, and music are all phenomenal. I did say in the beginning of the video that the animation looked a bit dated, and I still stand by that, but I still think the animation looks damn good even today. If you like this video, I would appreciate any extra support by becoming a member of my Patreon for only $2, where you will get early access to the comic I'm currently making, as well as most of my videos early. I hope you all enjoyed watching this. Let me know what you think of the movie in the comments, and yeah.